Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where I, Ivor Kovac, and my good friend Stilgar, we each take turns coming up with a topic from history with the purpose of trying to come up with something that the other guy has not heard about before. And most of the time that turns out to be the case. Today, there is a chance actually that you've heard about this guy that I'm going to bring up. So, but let's see. Um, have you ever heard of Prester John?
Prester John. It doesn't ring a bell. No.
Oh, okay.
But maybe
All
if you
right.
tell me more about him, maybe I'll just like, oh, wait.
Okay, so I'll give you a hint. He wasn't actually a real guy. He was a mythological guy that people thought to be real during the Middle Ages.
Nope, still nothing.
Okay. See, that's the thing is like most people, and I mentioned this in one of my videos on my channel where I talked about the medieval mythology. Like when I say mythology, what do you think of first? You think of
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the
No.
Rings? Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
no, like or the Odyssey, or like the Norse mythology, stuff like that.
yeah, most people they think of something from the ancient world before the times of Christ. I mean, Tolkien would be happy that you think of his work because he was actually trying to create a new mythology. But nobody that I've ever met thinks about the medieval mythology. You know, when Catholicism had taken over Europe, we had our own mythology, of the day, which kind of combined exaggerated accounts of other parts of the world with remnants of the Greek mythology. So, okay, so Prester John. All right, so to begin with, uh, this myth came about at a time, during the Middle Ages when our ancestors were being badly squeezed by Islam, both in the East and the West. And of course, Spain was already overrun and it seemed like Europe was going to be extinguished and maybe Christianity was going to be extinguished because of the spread of Islam and the piracy and all those other things that you've mentioned in your video. So Prester John kind of gave hope, which turned out to be a false hope. But basically, um, the idea was that somewhere in the east, beyond the realm of Islam, there was Prester John who had a great realm. So, what I want to start off with is read some quotes from this book that I have called The Book of Marvels and Travels by Sir John Mandeville. And Sir John Mandeville, he was an English guy who lived during the Middle Ages, and he wrote this book, which was like purported or presented as being a log of his travels, where he tells you about different parts of the world. But it seems, in the full light of today and knowing how the world is, it's obvious that he didn't really go to these places and that he was just reporting rumors and maybe also making some stuff up. But to begin with, as far as where Prester John lives, um, and I'll read here. You should know that the region of Prester John, Emperor of India, is underneath us. For one traveling from Scotland or England towards Jerusalem keeps climbing, for our lands are in the lowest part of the west, and the region of Prester John is in the lowest part of the east. And they have daytime when we have night, and night when we have day. So back then, they did know that the world was round, contrary to all the nonsense propaganda that's in pop culture. But it seems clear that he doesn't really know the shape of it or the size of it. But he does mention that. And then here's another one. This Prester John is the emperor of India, and people call his land the Isle of Pentakswari. I'm probably messing that pronunciation up. Pentakswari. The Emperor Prester John possesses huge estates and many large cities and fine towns, and in his kingdom are many great fine islands. For this land of India is separated into islands because of the great floods flowing from paradise. So, if you recall, they used to put Jerusalem in the center of the world.
Yes.
And actually, John Mandeville, he says earlier why Jerusalem was in the center of the world. And his theology is not quite right either, just like his geography isn't. But basically, what he says is it's in the center of the world because, if you go to spread a message, you need to do it from the center of the town. And so God chose the center of the world to spread his gospel so that all parts of the world could hear it equally. And that's why they assumed that Jerusalem had to be the center of the world, apart from, them not knowing how big the world actually was. But here, I've got some more. Prester John is a Christian, and so is the majority of his country too, but they don't have all the articles of our faith. However, they truly believe in the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, and they are extremely devout and loyal to each other, and they set no store by material possessions. Prester John has 72 provinces, or countries, subject to him, and in every one of these there is a king, and these kings have other kings under them. In this land there are many marvels, for here there is a sandy sea made of sand and shingle, and not a drop of water. It ebbs and flows with great waves, just like other seas, never still or resting. Nobody can traverse this sea by a ship or in any other way, and therefore people don't know what land is beyond it. Even though there is no water in that sea, people still find good fish, a different shape from the fish in other seas, and they have a lovely sweet taste and are good to eat. There are massive mountains 3 days' travel from that sea, through which flow a great torrent, full of precious stones, and not a drop of water coming from paradise. It flows, uh, it flows with great waves into the sandy sea. These torrents run so fast for 3 days in each week and stirs up the boulders within it, so it makes a great din. And the moment they reach the sandy sea, these rocks can no longer be seen. In these 3 days, when it flows like this, nobody dares to come near. But on all other days, people can go into it wherever they like and take the stones. Beyond this torrent, towards the desert, there is a vast sandy and stony plain amongst the mountains, in which plain there are trees, upon which a fruit begins to ripen at sunset every day. It grows like this until midday, and then it shrivels, so that when the sun goes down, there is nothing to see. Nobody dares eat this fruit because it's a kind of magical illusion. It does this each day. So that's a river of. So he's talking about like a sea of sand, and you can't swim in this sand, but it moves kind of like water.
Well, how
And
come there
then
are fish in there though?
So the thing about a lot of these medieval stories and myths is they contain many exceptions to the laws of physics and science. And that's one thing I was going to say is like, do you notice you'll notice some similarities to Saint Brendan, like there being places where you have like here he just mentions a great river of precious stones flowing into the sea of sand. And in St. Brendan, they have a lot of that kind of stuff, like jewels all over the ground, and places where treasure is, you can just pick it up as you go. So I'm noticing in the medieval stories, there's two things. So like if you want to write a medieval story, you must have places where there's gold and jewels that can be easily and cheaply gotten, just like all over the ground, or in this case, it's flowing in a river. And then the other thing is you need stuff that is an exception to the laws of physics, which may or may not make sense. And then if you really want to make it look authentic, have some place where there's like a gateway to hell. So
But this
I
one
don't
has
know.
like paradise right next to it, right?
Paradise, well, I'm going to get to that, but Paradise is actually further east of the realm of Prester John.
Okay.
And I don't think Prester John rules all of India because in other parts of the book he talks about the other parts of India. And one thing he says that's kind of interesting is like he says that we, Europeans, live under the moon. And because we live under the moon, we're always trying to go out and explore other places because the moon is a swift moving planet and it causes us to also move and explore.
Mm-hmm.
But in India, they live under Saturn, and therefore Saturn is a slow moving planet, so they're content where they are and they don't usually leave their lands.
I love it.
Yeah, it's and just to understand how that could possibly make sense, you got to remember that they have a geocentric model of the universe where Earth is in the center,
Yeah.
and all the objects, including the sun, are smaller than the Earth, and they all orbit within spheres that are going progressively outward. So he may have actually thought that there's no moon, that you can't see the moon if you go to India,
Yeah.
which
Well,
is, hmm?
which is actually the way the Greeks saw it as well. They also had a geocentric worldview, the ancient Greeks. But as far as I know, but I love
They
the
did.
yeah, I love the like the images. Just listening to it, his description, like it really speaks to the imagination. Like
Yeah,
it could be like a video game or some kind of 80s movie. I don't know. It's really like Indiana Jones type kind of thing. It's really speaks to the imagination. I love it.
yeah, and the fact that and it's a shame that the medieval mythology gets ignored so much, um, and it probably gets ignored because it came about after Christianity was introduced. But also, uh, I'm wondering, like reading all this stuff and talking about gold and jewels and all and the fine riches that are elsewhere that can be easily gotten. I'm wondering if this might not be these kind of stories that caused so many of our ancestors to spread out to other parts of the world. Like trying to get rich quick. Like, oh, there's just gold sitting on the ground. You can go there and you can take it.
Yeah,
So,
considering
uh,
that probably they were pretty poor where they were.
oh
So
yeah, most
yeah,
people are pretty poor even today.
yeah. Well, I mean, although by their standards, a lot of
Yeah,
people today would be pretty rich because anyway. But
yeah, you're right. Yeah, by those
yeah,
standards, if you live in a little small one room house and you just have a pot roasting over the fire,
yeah, you
that's
don't
the only
have
pot you got.
sanitation.
And no sanitation. And then they used to just scrape their leftovers off back into the pot at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Um,
if they had any, I think they'd probably go a couple days without sometimes. So
it's
yeah,
like, what's for dinner tonight? Stew. No, that's what we had last night. Well, you're lucky that you even have stew. Those
exactly.
Saracens, they have to eat sand.
Yeah. They got to go out into the sea of sand and catch themselves some fish, because
So,
anyway, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
well, this is beyond the realm of the Saracens. This
Oh
is
yeah, yeah.
this is actually so, and now actually
Although
coming.
like back when I was younger, they would say like like in India, some kids don't even have food, so finish your dinner.
That's
Except
actually
here, except here, they would be telling each other stories about how they have all these riches and food in India, whereas they had done. But yeah,
Yeah, actually, yeah. Well, not all of India is nice, but the realm of Prester John is very nice. And
it's a
but
very
like,
Indian name, also, Prester John. Yeah.
well, yeah. I've also got the reason why he's called Prester John.
Okay, it's a
But
cool name. Yeah.
yeah, well, I want to say something about this sea of sand. In
Hmm.
India, there's actually like in western part of India, there's a great desert called the Thar Desert, and it's got huge sand dunes. So it's entirely possible that Prester John and others in Europe, they heard about this desert that has waves like a sea, and they just assumed that, oh, it must be moving like a sea. And sure, why shouldn't there be creatures living in it? But I wonder if, like Frank Herbert, when he wrote his Dune book, maybe he read some of this stuff and thought, well, why not have like creatures swimming through the sand?
It's,
But
it's possible he was into a lot of old mythology as well, and so yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
so this Prester John, when he goes to battle, doesn't have a banner carried before him. Instead, he has 3 crosses made of fine gold, large and long and decorated with precious gems, carried before him. 1,000 men-at-arms and 100,000 foot soldiers are tasked with looking after each cross, and more than 100,000 foot soldiers guard the standard during battle in other places. He's got innumerable men when he goes into battle against other rulers. When he rides with his household retinue and not in battle, then he carries before him a wooden cross, unpainted and without gold and gems, but totally plain, as a sign that our Lord suffered death on a wooden cross. Also, he has carried in front of him a golden plate full of earth, signifying that his nobility and his power shall become nothing, and his flesh will return to the earth. They also carry in front of him another vessel full of gold and jewels, gems like rubies, diamonds, sapphires, emeralds, topaz, iridite, chrysolites, and various other gems signifying his lordship and power. So again, like this idea of other parts of the world are incredibly rich, so that jewels and wealth are common. But it seems like they didn't realize that that would cause inflation. It's still, oh, maybe they did, I don't know, but like there would be a, if everybody has something, then there's got to be a higher standard of value. Um,
Yeah. Or
so
maybe they just didn't think about that.
I
But I
think the
also I,
average
I
person
also
didn't
like
think.
how he's got the dirt by him kind of as a memento mori, which is a very stoic thing to do. Because
Yeah.
yeah, there you go. That's cool.
Um, and now the court of Prester John. So now I shall describe the arrangement of Prester John in his palace, which is in the city of Shush, where he usually resides. And this palace is so magnificent, and it's a wonder to describe, because above the main tower are 2 round gold filials, and each of these has 2 huge brilliant gems that shine brightly in the night. And the main gates of the palace are made out of precious stone called sardonyx, and the edges of the bars of the gates are made of ivory, and the windows of the halls and chambers are made of crystal, and some of the tables at which he eats are made of amethyst, some are of emerald, and others are of gold and precious gems, and the pillars supporting the tables are made of such gems too. Moreover, one of the steps of which the emperor approaches his throne where he sits to dine is made of mastic wood, another of crystal, another of jasper, another of amethyst, another of sardonyx, another of cornelian, another of calque, I'm not sure, and his footrest is made of chrysolite. These steps are edged with pure gold, beautifully crafted with large pearls and precious gems, and the sides of his throne are embroidered with emeralds, gold, and precious gems. The pillars in his chamber are made of pure gold, and many gems and other precious stones that shine brilliantly through the night. And though these gems provide plenty of light during the night, nevertheless in his chamber 12 great crystal vessels full of balsam are lit, in order to provide an agreeable sweet fragrance to take away foul air. His bed is fashioned out of sapphires, neatly fixed with gold, and that he may sleep well and refrain from debauchery. For he does not like to sleep with his wives, except at 4 times each year, according to 4 seasons, and then that is only to conceive children. So
Wow.
I, yeah,
That's very puritanical. That's interesting. When was this written down? Like from what year was this story?
let me see here. Uh, I think it's written around the same time that the same century as Harold Hardrada. Well, let me just see what exactly. In Search of John Mandeville. It says it. All right, here we go. The author, one John Mandeville, claims to be a knight from the southern English town of St. Albans, Hertfordshire, traveling in the 1320s or 1330s, but it is clear that this persona is fictional, as some of the peoples he depicts.
So you're saying 1320s is when he was
That
supposedly alive?
that's when the story was written down. So, and actually, I've got a different time. He's not the one that created this myth of Prester John, and I do have a timeline on how the myth got started, or at least most likely how it got started. But there's one more thing I wanted to read about the land of Prester John, and then I'll get into how that myth. So, not every part of the realm of Prester John is nice and glorious. It says there's a place, some parts of it that are quite hazardous and dangerous. So here's one where he talks about that. Uh, a short distance from this place, on the left-hand side near the river Faison, is something very marvelous. There's a valley 4 miles long between two mountains. Some people call it the Enchanted Vale, some the Valley of Devils, some the Vale Perilous. In this valley are many storms and terrifying noises, every day and every night, sometimes like the noise of many drums, kettle drums, and horns, like at a great party. This valley is full of devils, and always has been, and people have said that an entrance to hell is there. In this valley there is a great deal of gold and silver, on account of while Christians and others who have traveled there out of covetousness are strangled by devils, and so few return. In the middle of this valley, on a rock, is the physical face and head of a devil, utterly repellent and horrible to see, and only the head is visible down to the shoulders. There is nobody in the world, Christian or otherwise, brave enough not to be terribly afraid when they see it. He looks at everybody so piercingly and wickedly, and his eyes are so fast moving and flickering like fire, and he changes his countenance so often that nobody dares for all the world to approach. Also, lots of flames of different colors come out of his mouth and nose, and sometimes the fire stinks so much that nobody can bear it. However, good Christians who are secure in their faith can go into that valley without harm, and as long as they confess properly and they bless themselves with the sign of the cross, devils will not injure them. So, and of course,
Interesting. So
it,
I thought you were talking about India, but now it sounds like you're talking about California. No, but seriously, that's cool. Hey, what I had to think of was actually of the part in Neverending Story
mhm.
where the kid has to go through the valley where you have these two statues on each side, and if there's like any, I think it's any form of doubt that he has in his heart, then he'll get struck. Like there's a laser that comes out of them and it strikes them. Remember that part?
Yes, I remember that part, and that's a very good comparison. It does feel like the '80s movies. Maybe this would have made a good '80s movie. You're right, because the '80s was a time of creativity still, and original stories would get told, and like Never Ending Story. Yeah, it's kind of set in a universe where anything can happen. There's no not really much in the way of like formulaic magic. Like I think formulaic magic, like the kind that you see in most video games, stories, and comics, if it really existed, it wouldn't be magic technically. It would just be another function of the laws of physics, because it's something that follows rules and is naturally possible within the universe, and anyone can do potentially. But this kind of magic that you see in these medieval stories, it's like totally random stuff that doesn't really work and can't really be explained. It's just straight up exceptions to the laws of physics.
Yeah, and it is also a lot of universe building and it's like this outlandish kind of universe, which is, well, without the rules, then I guess. But there's a lot like description going into the universe. But is there any action? Like, is there any Thor or Achilles going out and slaying people, or because so far there's a lot of description, or is that just because you're trying to kind of paint the universe or the mythology so
So,
far?
well, as far as the book of Sir John Mandeville goes, there's not a lot of adventure. It's more like him telling you about what's there. But like later on, he says that his friends and they went through this valley and they came out of it safely. And he also says that earlier, like when he's in Jerusalem, he's able to worship in like the mosque. I think they call it Al-Aqsa Mosque, the one that's built over the Temple Mount. But yeah, this book is meant to kind of tell you about the world and what's there. There's other medieval stories, where you have adventures and such, like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, where he cuts the Green Knight's head off, and the Green Knight just picks it up and walks away, rides away. And then later on, he has to meet the Green Knight to face a blow. And of course, St. Brendan is an adventure story. But yeah, I mean, the medieval literature is worth, it's worth exploring. It's worth getting into. And I might write a story.
And I'm guessing this is because the way you opened this was kind of like their hope, because they were so kind of scared and they were afraid that they were gonna lose and get overrun altogether, and this was kind of like the hope of an ally being out there that would come and free them from Muslim occupation or the threat of Muslim occupation. Is that right?
That's right. And actually, there is some basis for that. But first, in case anybody's like maybe they want to know more about this world. If you go east of the land of Prester John, which is, he rules like India as far east as India goes, but you go east of that, there's great deserts that are always dark, and eventually you come to paradise, and paradise is the Garden of Eden, but it's got high stone walls around it which can't be penetrated, and it's on a raised plateau on top of that. And then, in addition to that, so it's a raised plateau with walls of high stone and powerful rivers coming out of it that can't be navigated. So you can't actually get in there. But these rivers, they feed. So like these guys, what they believed is that the Faison River, in the Bible, it talks about the four rivers, the Tigris, Euphrates, the Faison, and one other one I forget the name of, that all flowed out of Eden, or they flowed through Eden. So these people, like our ancestors, they just assumed that, oh, those rivers in the Middle East called the Tigris and Euphrates, well, that means they're still here, so the Faison must still be here. But apparently and they placed the Faison in India, and I'm going to say why. But they very unlikely that those are the original rivers, because that world that existed by the flood would have been completely destroyed. You're not going to find any of that same geography. Like if the whole world is really underwater, then afterwards it's going to be a different set of rivers that emerges. So it's probably, though, they were named after the original Tigris and Euphrates, just like there's a Rome, Georgia, and a Rome, Texas. Well, there's a Rome, Georgia, and a Paris, Texas, but neither of them are actually the original Rome or Paris. So why is he called Prester John? There's a legend that there was an emperor of India who had a lot of Christian knights in his service, and eventually he got curious about it, and he wanted to see all the different denominations that existed. So he travels throughout Middle East with his knights, observing different services, and he stops in Egypt where some priests are being ordained. And he says, what's going on here? And they say, the priests are going to be ordained here soon. And he says at that point, I don't want to be called emperor anymore. I want to be called priest. And I'll take the name of the first priest that comes out of the ceremony. So the first priest that comes out of the ceremony is named John. And this guy takes on the name of Prester John, but it actually ends up being the title, so that every emperor that comes after him is called Prester John. And another,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
And another
interesting.
custom he has is, well, that's how, because obviously the original guy couldn't still be alive at
Yeah,
that
yeah.
time. So they have to find a way to continue the
I,
legend.
I didn't think of Prester coming from priest, which in Dutch is actually priester, which is pretty much okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that where
So
the English name Prester comes from, actually?
this wasn't an exclusively English legend. This was all across Europe.
Okay.
It probably is the same thing in English, because back then English and Dutch would have been much closer, like we
Okay.
mentioned in the previous video.
Yeah.
So how did this myth get started? What started it? Well, it's hard to know for sure. But what I found is, and we can put the link to this website in the comment section. But basically, in 1122, there's a guy. He was the patriarch of the St. Thomas Christian Church. So the patriarch John comes from India. He's from the St. Thomas Church to visit Rome. And while he's there, he talks about his own church community. Supposedly, he said that the body of St. Thomas was there in India, where he comes from, and that the land is watered, like India is watered by the river Faison, which flows out of paradise east. And he gave the impression to them that he was the physical ruler of his territory or state. And it could be that he was like the head of a church estate, kind of like how during the medieval times the Pope had the papal states that kind of surrounded him, which also supplied food for them, you know.
Hmm.
So it may have been something like that, but on a smaller scale. I'm just speculating.
Well, the emperor of the East Roman Empire was also the head of church,
Yeah,
and later England's got the same thing, right? Where the king is also, or the queen is also the head of church.
yeah, the Church of England, the Anglican Church, was originally subject to the crown, and I think the reason for that was because King Henry VIII wanted to just divorce his wives instead of killing them or something like that. But
Mm,
um,
yeah.
so then what the next thing that happens is um, so the next thing that happens is in 1165, there's a letter that's sent to the Pope, the Emperor Manuel Comnenos, the Eastern Roman Empire, and Frederick Barbarossa, which is written as though it's from Prester John. And the letter was fake, but it was copied a lot and translated into multiple languages. And basically, what it does is it describes this great emperor, this great realm in India, which is ruled by this Prester John, and it's a Christian realm, and they have a vast army and lots of wealth, and they're going to come and help the Europeans in their fight against the Saracens. And it says, like that Prester John, he wants to visit the Holy Land, and he's going to come with a big army. So I meant, that would have been some very good news if that had been real, if it had been true. It'd been like, finally. And
Yeah.
supposedly this letter was to kind of inspire the Crusades, because people were like, well, if he's coming, then we can also go and we can meet up there, and we'll get the task done faster of retaking the Holy Land. And
Mm.
it would have been nice if it was true, but it wasn't true. And what happens is, as Europeans begin to explore more of the world, they find that there's no Prester John in India, and they think, okay, maybe he's in some other part, like maybe he's in China or some other place. And then they find out that no, that's not the true either. There never was a Prester John here. So eventually, the legend of Prester John gets shifted over to Africa, and they think that in the realm of Abyssinia, which is often called Ethiopia, not to be confused exactly with the current state of Ethiopia, but they thought he must be there. He must have a great empire in Ethiopia, and so that turned out also not to be the case. But the Portuguese, they started sailing around Africa to find Prester John there, and you can see mention of him included in some of the maps of Africa that were made later on during the Age of Exploration. And they did find like the Christian kingdom of Ethiopia or Abyssinia that was there, and they helped them, or they tried to help them in their fight against Muslims, and that was the best candidate out of everything they found so far. But of course, it wasn't nearly so grand as, I mean, it is a cool place, but it wasn't so grand as the stories about Prester John.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting story.
And
yeah.
there's one thing though that I do want to say, like about the St. Thomas Christians. There was a pretty big Christian denomination in India, which is started by St. Thomas, one of Jesus's apostles.
Yeah.
And I went to the Indian Orthodox, I found the Orthodox wiki or an Orthodox wiki, and they said, like, according to their traditions, St. Thomas arrived in India in 52 AD, and he founded 7 churches in Kerala, which is one of the southernmost states in India today. And the people that live there, they speak a language called Malayalam. And a lot of them, they'll have John or Thomas or Matthew in their name, usually as their last name. And it probably is because they're part of this church. And according to the tradition, St. Thomas was killed in 72 AD in Madras, which today we call Chennai. It's in Tamil Nadu. He was martyred there. But what happens is, when this Prester John myth was going on, when it was getting started, it was just the St. Thomas Christian Church that was there in Kerala. But in the 17th century, when Portuguese come there to that part of India, then they try to absorb those people into the Catholic Church, and it starts creating schisms and issues. So ultimately, St. Thomas Christian Church splits into a bunch of denominations over time since then. And today, the biggest ones are the Syro-Malabar Church, the Malankara Orthodox Church, and the Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church.
Yeah. And apparently people took it seriously for quite some time. So
yeah, well,
yeah.
You think about what the Middle Ages was like, with all the destruction and the wars and the chaos. Well,
and the plague.
The plague. Yeah. So if some Indian guy he probably really did come from like a church holding of some kind. And he may have exaggerated how much stuff he actually had. But let's say this guy is there in Rome and he's talking about all this stuff, and the Pope is even listening to him because he wants to know what else is out there. Then all these regular people, like some dude's listening, and he goes home to his wife and he says, "Hey, you wouldn't believe it. There was a priest king from India, and he has this huge kingdom there." And then, his wife's like, "Oh, what's it like?" "Well, I don't know. It must be pretty huge. He must be pretty rich." And then the next thing you know is his wife goes to the market or the well or whatever, and her friends are there, and she's like, "Oh, you wouldn't believe what I heard about. There's a great emperor in India who has a huge realm, and it's even bigger than Rome, and it's bigger than the Papal States, and he's got all this gold and jewels. Like gold and jewels are like dirt there because they're just everywhere, all over the ground." And the next thing you know, it's getting added to and added to and added to. So,
yeah, there's a saying that we have, and it translates to, I don't know if it translates well, like the wish is the father of the thought. So kind of like what you really desire becomes what you start thinking about. And I guess that also works its way into myths, right? Because it's something they really wanted, and it would have been really cool.
Yeah,
And then if you add all this money to it and its wealth, I mean, that's an awesome story. I do find it interesting that this guy had 4 wives, because how would that work with being Christians? And then was really puritanical about, because I know there were puritanical phases in Christianity, but I don't think they happened till like the 17th or the 18th century, not during medieval times. So I do find that interesting, but I'd have to look into that a little bit more to see if I'm not off on that. And I thought it was interesting that there was a shush city, and I was going to crack a joke about maybe that's where his wives lived. Because, yeah.
well,
Anyway, but yeah, cool.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
don't know if he had 4 wives. He had at least 4.
Yeah,
It
but that
wrote that.
again, that's actually that was a reason why they said, how much of a Christian water was Harold Hardrada in the previous story, because he also ended up getting a second wife, probably at one point, which was an issue, which is
Did he?
also why Henry VIII did the whole church thing, right? Because you couldn't just have multiple wives. The church was pretty firm on that, so that's interesting.
Yeah, in Europe, I don't find, even in like pre-Christian times, I don't find a lot of polygamy. Usually, you do have people cheating on their wife, and you also have people divorcing their wives, but having multiple wives at the same time doesn't really seem to be much of a European custom that I've seen. It's
Yeah.
more like now there are some Indo-European cultures that had it, like the Persians, and I don't know that it was ever a thing in India either. I know that like the Mughals they did it, but they were Muslims that were not native to India anyhow. Um,
No, I
and
just find it interesting. That's part of the story, because it's supposedly this Christian king, living there, or priest king.
yeah, I
Yeah,
also find it interesting. I find it a bit incongruent with the rest of his character. And I'm wondering if that was probably like something that got tacked on, via the telephone game, like people trying to one up each other about their knowledge of other parts of the world. Well, some dude could have been like, "Well, I heard he has one wife for every season of the year," and another dude's like, "Well, I heard he always marries the daughter of the great Khan."
yeah,
So yeah, it's
yeah, yeah,
it's interesting though. And there's a lot of medieval literature I want to start studying more, like especially the rumors from other parts of the world. Like it has kind of like it seems to me like the early forerunners of fantasy and sci-fi, and also kind of the reason why fantasy and sci-fi gets put together in the bookstore, and there's not like a clear line between one and the other.
yeah, for sure.
And there's another story in the book, which I'm not going to read now, but basically there's a guy that has robots in the story too.
Ah,
So, but there's in the Greek mythology, Hephaestus, he also uses robots.
yeah, yeah,
So,
and the I've been reading a lot about the East, or the Byzantine Empire, so forgive me, but
yeah,
or the
it's cool.
Eastern Roman Empire, they had robots also using steam, and that would make all kinds of noises and would move, and the throne would move up and down on which the emperor sat. And I also wanted to just say, they had this myth when Constantine fell. It was Constantinople fell. It was such a shock that they had these myths about how the priests in the Agata Sophia church, how they would, when it fell, they melded into the walls during the service, and that the day that Constantinople would be retaken, that they would continue their service as if nothing had happened. And then there was another myth about the emperor turned to stone. He was never killed. He turned to stone, and he's still underground, waiting there with his army, for the one day when it's time for him to come out again and rule Constantinople again. But yeah, anyway, different stories, but there's so much cool, so many cool things out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of like the Arthur myth, where as he's dying, they put him into the boat and they take him out to Avalon so that he'll be mended and he can return when needed, when the country needs him. Of course, as far as that goes, it's already too late because the English totally took over his country. But yeah, a lot of it is wishful thinking, like you said, but I think it's interesting and
Yeah, and that's actually not a bad thing necessarily. I mean, it gave people hope, right? So
yeah, I
mm.
wish it was true, like but it's not. But I
Yeah.
might still use it in a story or
It's
something.
still a cool story, like the Vikings that died with their swords in their hands. They were wishing to go to Valhalla that way. Probably didn't happen.
They
Not
probably
not
got
not an
stuck.
expert, but it's still a cool story, and it inspired them to do many great things. And like you said, this probably inspired a lot of explorers to discover new lands and travel. So
Either that or it was the moon pulling us.
yeah, there's something to be said about that too. Yeah. All
It's
right,
just
man.
it's just interest. Yeah, it's just trying to explain like why there might be a difference in culture between this group and the other. And that is something that I see people talking about now. Like, why is it that Europeans were more interested in exploration than other groups? And I think maybe there's something, maybe there's something to it. I don't know, but I know that like when the Mongols, they sure took over the biggest chunk of land ever in history. But I mean, they like steppe peoples. They used to move around a lot. But anyway, I think that's enough. I think. I
Yeah.
think.
I mean, the moon part is actually not that crazy. You still have millions of people that think that the position of Saturn somehow influences their careers or love life. So,
Yeah, stupid people.
yeah.
So like and these are the same people that will turn their nose up at what they call religion, but then they believe in all this hog slop. And actually, on my channel, I'm gonna do a video getting into like the mythology of Mars and what people thought about that over time. So I'll be covering some more of this stuff in depth, like separately. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
all
and
right,
just
man.
for any other listeners, the whole part about Shush City was a joke. So
Yeah, and
it was just too easy. It was like open shot. Yeah. Anyway.
well, but you know what? In that language that they spoke back then, like this book, it was not written in modern English, so like shush would have probably not like they probably would have had some other word to make people be quiet.
Yes,
Yeah,
it would
and
be.
that's another thing about people that I'm not gonna drop any names here of any franchises that are being scuttled, but if you're writing a story set hundreds of years in the future, and you think it's reasonable to drop like the F bomb and all sorts of other like modern vulgarisms, you got to understand 400 years in the future, the language they're speaking may not even be mutually intelligible with what we're speaking now.
Yeah,
Because
language is evolving
yeah,
all the
go back
time.
in
Yeah.
time and read Canterbury Tales without the translation and see how much you understand before you try to, think that people are going to be saying dude and uh, literally and like totally 400 years in the future, or the F word or whatever other words. I,
Yeah,
there- you
but
know,
but but apparently somebody in Iceland can read um, the Edda prose
well,
and
yeah,
and read it just okay. Actually, probably not perfectly fine, but yeah, for sure our language is changing rapidly.
yeah, it will change. And the older languages, not people you can be because they have a written text and you can can go back and you can learn them. Like Tolkien, he went back and he learned the old English, and he learned a few other languages as well. Like I'm not getting ready to do it, but I mean,
Yeah,
it
but
can't
yeah,
be
in the
done.
future it will be complete. Like if you even like if you let's say you take a medieval Icelandic person and you put them in Reykjavik of today, like even if you know the old Norse word for axe, that probably doesn't get you very far. Like because you wouldn't know how to ask for the bus stop or anyway, like
Well,
or
if I say scootily pooping, like, does that mean anything to you? Scootily poop?
no,
Scootily pooping?
what is that? It
It's
sounds awesome. Yeah,
1920s slang for basically the F word.
really.
Yeah, and we're not using it today, and nobody has any idea what it means. Scootily poop.
Scoodly poo?
Yeah, scootily poop. Scootily pooping. It means,
See, it's a good word. I like it.
yeah, like you can look at like a list of slang that's fallen out of use,
Yeah,
and it's pretty, it's pretty amazing. Like the bee's knees. Like, oh, that's the bee's knees. Well,
yeah,
today we would say that's cool, but 200 years from now, who knows?
yeah.
Or even 100. 1920s was 100 years ago. We don't use a lot of that anymore. So,
Yeah, do you want to close this one out before
yeah,
you
let's
go ahead
close it
and
off.
get
Let's,
Chinese food?
yeah. So let me just say, before we go, if anybody I think this is already a massively long video, but if anybody's still listening at this point, and you like this content, then do leave us a comment and a like. Also share. As lame and cliche as it sounds out, we are getting started, so we do need that stuff will really help us, even if it's just one person doing it. And if you'd like us to address a particular topic, then do say so in the comments, because both of us, we do go and we check the comment section. So there's a very good chance that we will see whatever you have said to us. And that's it.
All right, man. Good episode.
All right. Thanks.